We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we present on here today, and also the lands that we've travelled through and that the presentation went through in former iterations, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. The Yagan Square waterline, which is the focus for this presentation, there's a whole range of narratives for Yagan Square which we won't delve into in such detail, but the Yagan Square waterline specifically is a design collaboration between Dr. Jonathan Tarry, the principal architectural firm Lines Architects, Aspect Studios in collaboration with IPH Architects, and notably the Wadjuk Working Group and the MRA, and then later on Urbanstone and Doric. But then more broadly, the project has a whole range of other consultants and people involved. It's a $73.5 million project across 1.1 hectares. It's an incredibly complex site, so there's a whole range of people involved to deliver it, and you know, if we had 10 of these presentations we could drill into each one of those topics, but we'll keep going. And you two just feel free to jump in whenever, obviously. So a bit of an introduction to the site and its context. The site is at the eastern end of Perth CityLink, which is being developed by the MRA. On the, I wonder if this has a pointer. Yes. So on this side is Perth CBD, and then here is Swan Lake and Elizabeth Quay, and then up here is North Bridge, which is a retail strip, and there's a cultural centre here. So formerly this whole area was landlocked by infrastructure, and there was no connection between the two. So in terms of a really critical urban sort of intervention is that with Yagan Square, all of a sudden there's a new linkage between the CBD and to Northbridge. And then also in terms of not just as a urban convergence, there's also a convergence in terms of cultures. So we were extremely lucky to be given the brief of engaging with the design as a, initially as of Western Australia and of the landscape of Western Australia. And then in 2014, the then Premier Colin Barnett announced that it was to be named Yagan Square. And so that then kind of informed where, as a design team, where we were going, and it became of Perth more specifically.
Yeah, so the seats are a little bit uncomfortable there, so we sort of thought we'd move over here. And I think feel free to move around is the code, and I think staff bring drinks around, so it's quite a long presentation.
Can I just have a glass of water while we're talking about
and walking is very much part of what underpins the project as well. So the figure on the right there is a statue, bronze statue of Yagan, and Yagan is a very significant figure to the Indigenous people in the area. He was a leader and was one of the first identified Indigenous people to defy and challenge the settlement. So he said, "Excuse me, we're already living here, and let's have a conversation." There's also a very a different side of the story in that in negotiations with the first settlers, Yagan was led to a point of negotiation and then shot, decapitated, and his head was taken to the United Kingdom and remained on display in a museum until about 15 years ago, when it was returned and buried. So there's a very, very powerful and important and deep story to naming it Yagan, and also the Yagan figure. So that statue there is one that's located in the city. One of the few statues that's not actually of a colonial hero, yeah? So quite interesting.
So it was a very pivotal moment for us in that process to have hit the, to have our square, the square, go from being Perth City Square to being Yagan Square. And then, so the sort of, the site location before development, before its current situation, is that it's positioned very uniquely at the, and such is why there was the infrastructure there that I mentioned before. It was uniquely positioned at a former site of a wetland, and so the city grid always was at a moment of shifting at that point. So it's a very unique site for Perth in that sense.
So you see maps of the area. This is a current map data which shows the subterranean water systems in the site. So they're all connected. It's like rivers that flow underground. And the subterranean water flow was a really key generator in terms of the waterline project, and also in that it is a junction right on the site. So the site actually is a point where it was swampy, and it actually displaced the two grids. So you have the two city grids which are completely displaced, and that triangle, if you want to call it, where they meet is right where Yagan Square is. So if you look at some of the, you see the orange line coming down and some of the shapes that are in there, you know, you can read that as data and information, but you could also see it as a watercolour. Can you see that as a watercolour or drawing? Yeah. So we have a lot of material to show you, a lot of drawings, sketches, diagrams, and process imagery in the presentation, and so this is one of them, and it. You can see it reflected not only in the waterline project, but also in canopies and other parts of the architecture by Lyons and IPH, and also in the landscaping.
So I guess it's sort of, we're setting up that the project is about tying back together two key parts of Perth, but also is about reconciliation and, you know, acknowledging the sort of history of the site, which is also incredibly complex. The next sort of few slides are about the layer of convergence that also happens at the next layer of detail, a little bit closer on site. So Perth train station, as noted up there, has a train line which runs underneath the Horseshoe Bridge, and what's remaining on our site is the top of the train tunnel. So our ground level has a slope to it. So we're positioned, the site is positioned in between the Horseshoe Bridge, which is a heritage listed structure, and then this is the dive tunnel that your trains go under. William Street Mall cuts down through the CBD and then picks up again on the other side. So we're really having this opportunity to provide this direct link straight through.
So as well as the two grids, the city was divided by a railway track. So this project, in a way, links the two halves of the city with this, this walkway and series of pedestrian paths. So it's quite significant in that as well.
So this shows the first, so the Lyons building on the southern side, which is the food hall. I was just going to say that I guess that the other layer of complexity about the project is that we were looking at how to build a new city square for Perth, and then also how to maybe challenge what some of the ideas about that could be. So we've, you know, this is not just a city square where it's, you know, a water feature in the middle. It's got a playground, it's got a food hall in this building, a bar in this building which was by IBH, a central meeting place, Botanic Gardens, Northeast Garden, and then through this gorge area, and then a playground up on the roof. But the key thing that kind of composed all of the levels and circulation was also tying back into that idea of walking and the track, is that this key link here is providing a 1 in 21 loop all the way across the 3 levels and tying into the levels of the Horseshoe Bridge. And that really meant once that was working, then all the other spaces were sort of coming off that. So then you can see where we've got this playground up on the top, and so what is a city square if it can do a bit of everything? So
tracks and walking, obviously railway tracks and paths are a significant part of it. One of the stories of the area is the story of Balbuck, an Indigenous elder who lived in the area prior to settlement and then was banished for a period of time, some 2 decades, and returned to a place that had been, settled, had fences, houses, and was unable to recognise the city of Perth. And by a way of connecting and keeping the culture alive was a process of walking. So Balbuck actually would walk down the paths that she traditionally walked, which included just walking straight through fences, through people's houses. If the front door was locked, she just opened the door and would walk straight out the back door. So a complete kind of denial, if you like, of settlement. And you can see that in one of the works of Paul Carter, a text-based work. So tracks and tracking is also a very big part of the project. In many ways, it was set up as a people's square. So instead of it being like a ceremonial square, like traditionally, it was really meant to be informal. So people played there, interacted, gathered. Shall I say something about this?
Well, and tying into that, I guess like often when we're designing city squares, there's a lot of, I don't know if you've had to deal with the event management capacity issue. We had this luxury of, we had this sort of ground plane which could kind of take on board those requirements, which released the podium landscape to provide more intimate landscapes for people to engage with on a day-to-day basis, and provide the setting for people to walk through, just as John was talking about.
Yeah, so it's built on I don't know the exact code, 1 in 20 path or ramp.
1 in 21 sloped walkway.
Yeah, so that had to loop around the side and in some ways reflected that Horseshoe Bridge, which was originally a bridge that was set up for camel trains. Right? Perth wasn't quite as advanced as Brisbane. We had camels kind of leading carriages. So one side of the city was all warehouses, the other side was all offices, but the camel trains would go across this, what's called the Horseshoe Bridge, because they didn't want to build a long bridge, so they looped it around. In some ways that is reflected in the pathway and also the layout or the plan, if you like, of what's here now.
So technically the project is, yeah.
Was the bridge over the railway originally?
Yeah. Yeah, the bridge was over the railway. So the railway's been there a very long time.
So technically it was incredibly complicated because it's not just a podium landscape, it's a podium on a sloped train slab landscape. So there was incredible amount of work that went into making sure that there was all the stakeholders were obviously on board with what we were doing, but waterproofing, loading, things just working. So these, the next bit is just a quick site tour. So the site was opened on the 3rd of March this year. There's still been a few bits and pieces that they're doing. This is during construction or like the day of or the day before, which was just amazing to see them still like slapping on cladding before opening day. But yeah, so the architectural move is heavily referencing the Western Australian landscape in terms of its materials and also its form. So the materials are generating this sort of strata, which I think just works beautifully when you've got this 1 in 21 sloping through that strata. It really kind of, the architectural form is quite beautiful.
So the whole thing was in a way to acknowledge the whole of the West Australian history, landscape and environment, past, present, future, in a, what is it, a 1.2 hectare site. So the generator really was looking at landscape and looking at geology. So the ancient geology of the gorges and iron ore and sandstone and granite and basalt layers, and that's reflected in the architecture, the landscape architecture, and or the art.
These are, so the digital tower was by Lyons in collaboration with Bruce Ramus, and I think this is also an important thing to note, that there was a lot of advocacy done by the design team to make sure that all this, the layering of this narratives is coming out wherever possible, and also that other narratives such as advertising aren't coming out necessarily. So Bruce has put together a whole, he went and took hours and hours of footage in WA, and now the MRA have that accessible to screen, and it's actually remarkable to go on to be immersed in that at night time.
You know, yeah. A lot of squares are getting digital screens which are dominated by advertising, and that was originally put forward as, you know, this is a way to fund, if you like, the art program or the cultural program was to have advertising or sell this digital tower to Rio Tinto or someone. But an argument was put forward that you start blurring the lines between, if you like, art and advertising, you end up with a lot of confused messages. So given this was a site which was about reconciliation and about, if you like, promoting or conveying the state and or Australia, it was decided that the digital tower should remain as essentially an art project. That doesn't mean it's all individual artists showing their works, but the significance is, you know, you've got a tower which is a cylinder, and digitally activated means you have to film things in a very different way. You can't rely on the frame or the aperture or that sort of diegetic space that we're used to in cinema or plasma screens. And so a whole new lot of film had to be made, and what's incredible is when you see, if you like, fire coming up, and suddenly this tower, instead of it being something which, if you like, invades your field of vision like advertising does, it has an incredible presence in the city and comes to life as a sort of light artwork. The tower also structurally has 15 columns on it for each of the Noongar tribes, and can be activated, as you can see on the left there, it's activated with lights, and there it is digitally. And it's also, you know, that's footage of, you know, the ocean, but also there's been a whole commissioning of Indigenous artworks that have been animated and or expanded on by Bruce and other Indigenous artists.
I think what the images struggle to show is how gentle it is given its scale. So this is a photograph looking up through the lawn terraces over the gorge plantings and then up towards the northeast garden. And the gomphocephalas, the chewit trees to the right.
There's also a digital canopy, which
This is probably highlighting that pedestrian link that the project really opens up.
That are growing very, very well. Yeah.
They are. They are. That's another talk. So now we move right into the water feature.
Okay. This is Kirsten put this in. This was a sort of email I sent. Talking about...
She didn't brief me on what to say.
Okay, all right, okay. So there's sort of surprises here. So it's a bit of John speak there, really. It was me writing to Kirsten. So I was invited to work on the project from the outset with the architects, landscape architects. And I was one of 5 artists that were asked to work. My role wasn't really specified other than to try and integrate. Yeah? So my background is primarily sculpture, even though I've got a PhD in architecture. I would never call myself an architect. So my background is in sculptural objects in a whole range of materials and various scales, and I really jumped at the opportunity to integrate work. I think a lot of public art fails because it fails through lack of context. It's often an afterthought, and here was an opportunity to really embrace integrating it in a meaningful way, so it actually has a function, if you like, or a purpose within a new program. So having said that, it wasn't really about me doing a John Terry piece, yeah? So it was about having a conversation and bringing out skills and seeing what we could do. There was a lot of discussion about how we would work, and in a way we kind of landed. I'm not quite sure how I found myself working with Aspect, but it was a bit like, you know, it was a bit like being at a dance and we were the last ones without partners, you know, or something, I'm not sure.
No, we chose each other first.
We chose each other first, yeah. So I'd heard there was a water element, and I hadn't really worked with water, but I thought that could be really interesting, and was really driven by this question really about, you know, we talk about things as water features. What does the water do? And how can it actually operate and articulate other things? So if we can just go back to that other one. So one of the generators was really to, in a way, take a position which was a little bit outside of a narrative and try and lay down, if you like, a place for narratives to be built around. So I thought, really, it's not my place to tell an Indigenous story, even though I've mentioned them, I've taken that role. But in terms of translating an landscape art piece, I thought, well, it's not my place to tell an Indigenous story, to try and translate, to create a narrative which is a construct or a singularity. So what else can I do? I can work with, if you like, a concept of time and or erosion. So I also looked at the deep water flows in the area and thought about bringing out what lies below to the surface. So bringing that water system up to ground level and making it visible. And in a way inspired by the way water carves, if you like. So rather than the artist carving stone and or carving form, I thought, what about if nature is doing the carving, yeah, the elements? And really looked at entropy as a driver, so the whole notion of everything breaking down over time. And that became the real key to a lot of decision making in what you're about to see, and that was tested both in drawings and models and all kinds of things. So we ended up with this sketch plan of, well, where does the water come from? It comes out of the ground, which we called the source, and that still sits. And actually, do we have the source, the bronze source?
Yes.
We have a piece we can hand around, I think.
I'll go and get it.
Not sure where it is. And then it moves through the side. So the water comes out of the ground, if you like, goes into these pools and then is flowing through the site under gravity. So it moves from the high area to the low area under gravity. And so there's about 5 different moves and 5 different moments where it does different things as well. It starts to respond to where it is. And it also works back and forth between a kind of landscape edge, if you like, and a kind of urban edge or architectural edge. So it starts at the source, goes down a set of steps, like cascading down a set of steps, into the wall of the building, then into what we call the scoop, and then out into the northeast garden, and then down the cascade and into the deluge. And we'll just talk about how each of those parts was formed as and then translated as a design piece. So here it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
So this is the source, which is up at level RL21. And then there's the drop to get down to the 1 in 21 ramp. And then from that point on, each of the water features is following that track.
So there's a bronze cast model of the source, which is being passed around, will arrive in your lap sometime in the next 20 minutes. The white one is Northeast Stream. That's a 3D printed model. So this shows the water level. So we, again, instead of it being like a constant stream, if you like, responding to the phenomena, particularly West Australian, of flood and drought, So there's dry riverbeds and then there's flood, So the idea was that the water floods, if you like, out of the ground and runs through the site, and then it subsides, and then it's dry, and then it starts again, and it's timed in different ways. And we also wanted to test the different levels of water so that, it's, how many water features do you see around that look amazing when they're working, and then when there's no water in them, they just look like sort of drains or something else, yeah? So we wanted to avoid that and wanted to have life even though it wasn't maybe having water in it, yeah?
I think in the early days we were trying to work out whether or not we could actually have the water start at the source and then flow all the way through the whole system. Mm-hmm. But then, in collaboration with Waterforms, the system got pulled apart into its separate units, but conceptually it's still there.
Yeah, so we started again as a sketch, and then we started doing some 3D modelling and working. One of the dialogues or collaboration points was we both worked in Rhino, so we were able to make models and share them and modify them and change them. And so we started working with Rhino and treating it a little bit like, very, very simply. So well, let's make this tool, which is a kind of egg-like form or rock, and we'll make this tool and we'll put it into this soft material like digital mud, yeah? So we made this kind of bed and we stamped it in, and then we pulled it through and then smeared it, a bit like kids do when they're playing on the riverbank, yeah? Muddy riverbank. So this is playing with that, and some of the tests and explorations that came out of that sort of play really form some of this concept of water wearing things over time and or form wearing things over time. So there's some of the modelling, and then we also had other references. This image on the left here, sometimes I give it away a bit, but that's something you're familiar with. I'm going to ask you if anyone can guess what it is. Something magnified 1,000 times. You would have all had one if you're kind of of a particular generation. I think most of you would have had one. Anyone? Someone say vinyl record. Yeah, so that's the groove of a vinyl record. Magnified 1,000 times, yeah? And in some ways it's a bit like the groove of, water eroding, but it's also to do with entropy. The needle of a record erases the record each time you play it, yeah? So all you're left with is a memory of the song, but the needle gradually, cuts it away. And so every city we've got, this was a great point of conversation between ourselves, because especially Lyons architects, their connection with Perth was really through popular music, so they knew all about the Triffids. Yeah, do you know who Triffids? Yeah. And so talked a lot about the Triffids, and also connected it to this water and deluge, you know, Born Sandy Devotional and songs like that, which sing about the eroded, parched and wet West Australian landscape. And so we've changed the record though for every city. So Perth was obviously the Triffids, and then in Canberra we had the Church, yeah, Adelaide, Hilltop Hoods, so a band that recorded on vinyl. So what do you think it should be for Brisbane? Who's a Brisbane band? Go-Betweens, okay. Go-Betweens, not the Saints. Were the Saints really from Brisbane? I thought they were from Ireland, or no? Okay. Silverchair, no. The cameraman had a great band. Can you shout that out? Yeah. The ones that were playing and now they're superstars. Yeah. Okay. So there we are. There's your moment of connection. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, we kind of moved back and forth making different connections to things, you know. But there was there's layers of connections. It's not all about the environment, the landscape, you know, when you're working with entropy and time and wear and everything. So what's the next one?
So we move into each of the segments of the water feature. The first one being the source, which is right up in the forest landscape. So this is some very early sketches about the quality of the space that we were trying to achieve up in the forest area. I guess we also had this other narrative going on alongside this one about the horticulture and the plantings for the project, and we didn't know what type of trees were going to be up there at that time, but we knew that, you know, we have this opportunity to really put some incredible Western Australian trees up onto a roof, and then the landscape form sort of kept growing around that theme as well. So we've got a playground in the forest area as well, and a lawn sort of chill out, relax sort of space. So it's logical that the source is the play water feature.
This is some more digital modelling, again working with that tool, and then it became, you know, another layer of the collaboration was, while we were working like this, we would send these drawings to the Whadjuk working group for feedback, for guidance, just to be included in the conversation. And they immediately saw these as eggs, swan eggs, and thought that related to the source, and the swan's very significant totem animal, the Swan River. And so we took that on and expanded that, and that became this stamp, if you like, for those three pools which would fill with water and one flow into the next and then overflow. So again, we did sort of graphics like this to get feedback. And you'll see an example of the feedback. It wasn't always like, we like that bit or whatever. It was, you know, you were whispered things, or you were given a text which was sometimes sitting next to what you were doing rather than an exact critical feedback.
We worked incredibly closely with Phil Goodwin, who was at Waterforms at the time, particularly on the qualities of the water for this feature, because it's not, as opposed to the others you'll see that are where the water's falling. This one it's welling up and then being sent out through inlets. So we didn't want jets or you know, fine water. We wanted the water to be kind of an artwork in its own right. So the word that Phil took to, we were trying to explain to him, you know, and trying to draw water, and you know, and then he, someone described it. I think hairy water, and he just got it, and all of a sudden we're receiving these videos of how he's put a whole lot of system things into a bucket in the back of his thing, and he's gone, I reckon I worked it out. So once we had the hairy water thing, everything else kind of, we just had to work out how to manage the water then.
So we wanted water to have some kind of, I guess, you know, authenticity as well, you know, not for it to be spurting and not to artificially be bubbling, you know, but be sort of interrupted, unpredictable.
Yeah. You can see the context in this one has sort of evolved, where we've got these play mounds in strata in the forest, really being framed by that water feature.
And the water was all, is all treated, so it's at every stage, it's drinkable, so it's very high quality filtering process using a lot of different systems. And yeah,
the balance tank and the sanitary system for the water feature is incredibly complicated and expanded by about 2 once we got into construction. So yes, it's you wouldn't want to drink it though because it's full of chemicals, but
we also wanted to avoid having to put fence.
In the source, the maximum water depth is only 40 mil because it's the one designated play feature. But obviously the hairy water has a lot of volume, so the amount that the water's leaving is quite fast. It's like 1-to-1, pretty much. And trying to get the water to come in at different heights and then flow from one pool to the next in a way that is controlled by us, but is maybe, you know, makes it look a little strange. We did extensive work to obviously document it, but also in terms of the waterproofing, the tanking system, because it's on a building which has garden bed very close by. We've play ordered for the source egg in terms of climbability so that kids can't actually get on it. We aimed to get to allow one of the pools to have a gentle enough slope so that kids in wheelchairs were able to go through it and also around it. And also the splash zone and freeboard. So all the water features have a minimum 100 mil freeboard from the top of the water level. But when you've got hairy water happening, there's the splash zone is wider. So yeah, like, you know, there was design iterations happening, and then it would come back for technical redesign, and then back, and you know, so there was many cuts of this.
And we also started a conversation with Simon at this stage about how to translate it. So, you know, it's all great to be kind of blue sky dreaming, but can we actually build this? And the decision was made to make it out of stone, West Australian stone, granite. So 2 elements, you know, stone and water. Water wears stone over time, water pushes stone.
It was absolutely invaluable having conversations with Simon early on, because as you know, you've got clients asking you questions about buildability and price, and you know, just the weight of this was being interrogated all the time. So to be able to go to Simon and work through some of that stuff really early on in terms of like unit size, maximum weights, to be able to be physically cut and dealt with, and then how heavy that stone is. And so that happened at the very beginning, you know, right back at SD, way before these drawings were even done, probably back at the concept drawing.
Yes, I was brought into the project, and in fact I was brought in originally by the architects to talk about the strata, because the building, as Marty alluded to, was the representation was about strata, was about looking basically a landscape, looking like gorge, and the facade of the building was all about Australian stone, and in particular West Australian stone. Urbanstone have been advocates for Australian quarries for 10 years now, 9 years, 10 years. It's been really, it's been a difficult process. A lot of the quarries have closed down over time since 2000. There's been an influx of imported stone from overseas, and a lot of the quarries just didn't survive that period. So since 2009, we've been really pushing Australian granites. So this particular project is a real coup for us, because it really showcases what we can do with Australian granite. And as you'll see as the slides come on, how beautiful some of this Australian stone is, and it's particularly, you know, it's so Australian. You'll see the colours that come out. You'll see you won't see anywhere else in the world. These are some of the quarries that we've managed to reinvigorate over the years. I'll come around the front so you can see me. Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, so I brought these to the table as part of that strata process. They weren't all West Australian quarries, because we didn't have a lot of West Australian quarries at the time. There were 2 or 3 particular quarries that we were trying to extract rock out of the ground, or stone out of the ground, and that was on the left-hand side there. You've got the two from Bruce Rock, which is the top left there. Does that work? Yep, that one there. That's the coffee, and the one above that is the Duperano. Now they're part of the same formation. So it's quite a big saddle that forms out of the ground, submerges. It's submerged under the ground and then comes back out into another formation about 3 kilometres apart. And we do get 2 different colours out of it. We do tend to blend a lot of those of that particular stone, because it tends to lend itself really well to blending. We call it a granite. It's actually not a granite. It's a gneiss, and a gneiss is is formed when the formation or the stone is cooled relatively quickly. And what happens with a gneiss, it doesn't homogenise like a granite would normally, and you get a lot of veining, a lot of colour variance through it. So you will get pockets of quartzite, you get pockets of feldspar, you get pockets of granite, you get all sorts of other different minerals that haven't formed a pure granite. And that's actually quite beautiful in itself. The one below is from Esperance. That was the desert brown. So I introduced these to this project, not knowing which way we're going to go, and which, basically this was for the building to start with. As soon as Marty came to me and said, "Look, we're looking for the water features. What have you got?" I knew instantly it had to be the Duperano, because it has that movement, it has that water, and that colour. The colour, it's like Ayers Rock. You get the sunrise and the sunset, and it just changes colour with water. It changes colour with light. It's really quite unique. We've got obviously South Australian granites. The other one we used was the white at the top. On the left-hand side is the dolomite from the Pilbara, and that was introduced late in the project. We had to find, because there are a lot of stairs in the project, we had to find a 30% colour contrast to the Duperano and the coffee, which we primarily used throughout the project. And to get, this is for the Disability Access Code. So to get a 30% colour contrast on a variegated stone that changes from light to dark, it was really quite difficult. We put forward some blacks and
we also we used it for the precast as well, which was the stair nosing.
Oh, the stair nosing against the precast. So we initially introduced a black stone as the stair nosing as a contrast, but it didn't meet the 30%. and the white did. So that dolomite is quite a hard, it has the features of a marble, but it's a hard quartzite. So we'll flip to the next slide. So this was our first quarry visit. So as soon as we decided that I think we decided early on the piece, the Jupurana and the coffee were the stone we needed. So about 250 kilometres east of Perth, we all took a drive out in the middle of winter through floods. Remember?
One of the best days of my life.
Yeah, the roads were flooded. It was quite interesting. This is our Jupurana quarry. So in the Jupurana quarry, you really don't see the colours until you actually wet the surface. So we had the guys wet the surface, and this is the face. And what you're looking at is cuts in that if you were to drop those cuts down, those blocks would weigh around 70 or 80 tonne. So we drop them down and then cut them into manageable size. And a manageable size of a block out of a quarry is generally around 24 to 27 tonne. That's something we can transport, we can pick up with the front end loader. You'll see it's also, being a niche, as I explained, you've got that movement. The movement that tends to always form in a quarry from north to south, and that's just due to the polarity of the earth. So as it's cooling, it tends to always vein that direction, north and south. And that's really important when we're going into a quarry, because we've got to understand what direction we want to cut the stone. You can either vein cut or you can cross cut. And if you cross cut, you don't get those lovely veining, as you see on the bottom right hand corner. You don't get that lovely veining coming through. Cross cutting can give you an interesting look as well, but if you're going to a thinner slab or a thinner unit, it's never as strong as a vein cut. Generally, if you go to a thicker unit, it's fine. You can choose it for aesthetics. The other beauty of this stone is that it's very forgiving. So, we talk about, do you need to seal pavers? Do you need to seal stone? Do you need to seal whatever you put on the ground because of dirt? This particular one is so variegated that anything that lands on there just gets lost in the colours anyway. So it is very forgiving. It was a great choice for the water features in particular because it does change colour. And as John stated earlier, this was about the landscape being dry sometimes, being wet other times, being torrential other times, and changing, and the stone changes as those conditions change and changes with the seasons. These water features weren't designed to be on all the time. The water was turned off to actually show that this is a dry country, and I think it comes through. Oh, if you go back to that one again. Yeah, so you can see we've marked up on the left-hand side. We've marked up a block there. That's a 28-tonne block that we've pulled off the face of the quarry, and we've marked up. We generally mark every block that comes out. We mark which direction that our factory is going to cut the block, so we can get the veining consistently. One of the things that John had brought up to me early on in the piece was that with the flow of the water, he wanted the veining to all run in the same direction. We can cut in different directions, and we can just put slabs. For instance, if it's a 600 by 400 slab, you might have veining running across the slab, or you might have veining running lengthwise in the slab. John was quite insistent, I guess, but rightly so, because it created this movement of water. So the veining would always run in the same direction. So it actually looked like the natural landscape as well. So we had to depict it that way. So we'll just move on to the next one. So this is the block. These are some of the blocks we pulled out for this particular project. We pulled out over, I think it's over 1,000 tonne of granite to produce about 380 tonne of finished stone on this particular project, all sitting on podiums. So that was a challenge in itself.
1,049 individually carved stone.
That's right.
Pieces, and 345 tonne of stone.
Of finished stone. So this was the original stone that we chose that we chose to go into the project. This was all ready to go off to our factory for processing. The next one. This is a block inspection, so once again we just wet the side so we can actually work out, and John was instrumental in in picking what colours he wanted for what particular water features. There are 6 different elements of this in this project, so we wanted to be consistent on every element, that the colours all blend in and they kind of look like it all is homogeneous. This is when we produced. Well, we carved all these by hand, by the way. Everything that you see at in the future slides, were all carved by hand. It's very, very difficult to get your head around from a drawing on what it was supposed to look like. So we did some 3D models for our carvers. You can see on the left-hand side, this was a small rock, which we called an egg in one of the water features. The water feature was called the pool. So that was one of the eggs. On the right-hand side, you can see the base of it. So we're just checking, and this was invaluable as well, because we had John and Marty come up to the factory all the time, quality controlling, and the 3D modelling was a great reference tool for us. It was our quality control. That was really what we had to work off and what our carvers had to work off. This particular egg is the sculpture from the source. We had to produce a 28-tonne block out of our quarry to produce that 12-tonne block of that 12-tonne sculpture there. So that hasn't been finished yet. That's been carved to shape, and we're just fine-tuning it now. The finishing is the surface treatments, which we'll go on to next. Surface treatments are interesting with granites or any stone. There's certain stones you can't exfoliate, there's certain stones you can. Granites and gneisses, obviously you can exfoliate. Exfoliate's a heat process. And what it does, it brings out colour in stone, and particularly these ones, it brings out the pinks and brings out the reds. Yeah, well, this actually that's the exfoliation process. So what we're doing is we're burning the surface of the stone. One of the challenges we had when we pulled the stone, or what we call, it's called rock before it's touched by human hands. So we pull the rock out of the ground, we create a stone, and then the challenge for us was to make it look like a rock again. So exfoliation is a great process for that, because it destroys about 3 to 5 mil of the surface. So if you're specifying a particular stone and you want a certain strength and it's say 40 millimetres thick or 30 millimetres thick, and you want to exfoliate and finish, effectively the strength is only going to be in about 25. If it's 30 millimetres, it's 25 to 28 millimetres, because you really do destroy that surface with exfoliation process. You also can't exfoliate close to any sharp edges. Generally, when we cut stone or when we exfoliate stone, we cut a whole slab and then we exfoliate and then we slice it up to the finished sizes, and that way we get nice sharp edges. If you bring a flame close to an edge, you'll blow that edge away. The challenge we had here was we couldn't do that, because there were so many carved elements. We had to finish them all as individual pieces, and then exfoliate. We'll choose to exfoliate. So that was a challenge for us. And with this particular egg shape, we could exfoliate, but with the ground surface pieces, there were so many sharp edges. We had to sandblast. We decided that sandblasting was the only way to go. The difference, or the challenge, was getting acceptance that sandblasting was going to be aesthetically pleasing, because the rest of the project was exfoliated, and the colour is different unless it's wet, and if it's wet it comes out the same. So we've moved to the next one. So these are some of the ground. You can see the sharp edges there. As I've said, you can't exfoliate anything with a sharp edge. So that we rounded off every edge there that's the foot test, the high-tech foot test. So in this particular, this is the source. This was the water feature right at the top of the building. This is the source, the first of the water features. There were 256 individually carved blocks on the base, all around 300 millimetres thick, and carved into the centre down to about 200 mil thick. And you can see the difference between the exfoliated versus the sandblast. The base there, the pavers around the outside are exfoliated, and the base of the water feature is sandblast. So you can see that colour varies a bit. As soon as I don't know if you want to talk about the water. Do you want to talk about the water, John?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, okay. As soon as the water was turned on, this is one of the first day, I think this was opening day. We've discussed this.
It's amazing to go and, you know, opening day, there's been 4 years of planning and thinking, and kids just know exactly what to do, you know, in their nappies and the works. So, but yeah, it was quite incredible.
After we worked with Phil Goodwin, the water engineer, we called him the water whisperer from Waterforms. Did a lot of work, and he gave all the great principles about volumes of water and speed and behaviour and dynamics. We said, well, how do we know this is all going to work? And he said, you don't. You just turn on the tap. See what happens. So we did turn on the tap the day before the opening, and it did work. So this is literally taken the day, you know, but we had confidence in what we were doing, I think. So this was literally the first day it was turned on. Yeah, we felt it was going to work, and it did. And the great thing is, you know, like little kids don't need instructions. You know, you turn the tap on, they just straight there and knew what to do and right in there. And so it's been a constant kind of hit in a way. You know, everyone seems to know how to play again.
So this was one of the this is the first of the 6 water features.
Is this one with the film?
No.
We can't get the film going. Okay.
All right. Should we go to the next one? We'll go to the next one. So when the water fills up, it overflows. You know, the logic is we want this body of water to move through the site over 200 metres. How are we going to get there? So we didn't want it to be this sort of, if you like, faux landscaped form. You know, we wanted it to respond to truth on all levels. So it's landscape inspired, but then it comes back to that urban edge. So we made it fall down the steps, which again we thought was a great idea, to just have the water running down the steps just next to you, again as if it's a flood or a you know, a natural part. So here are some of the models showing it falling down the steps, and then I think we've got some of how it translated. So there it is. It's a very thin channel of water falling down the steps, and we had this idea also that, you know, we wanted to be able to put, if you like, someone put a little boat in the top of the source, they could follow it all the way down. So although the water is all moving at the same speed and you can get that sense, the water does actually return to the tanks and get cleaned at every stage. So there's 5 stages of cleaning. So at the end of the steps, it does return and then reappears in the wall.
I think that this one is, it's quite simple in the way that it works. The water's just dropping down a series of steps, but underneath that, the slope of the slab is like that, and the room to the paving was really minimal. So there was extensive work to kind of, you know, get this one over the line. And I think we worked quite hard to keep it in, because it is important for that concept of the, you know, that the water has a source and then it has a journey throughout the whole site. And if you can't see that the water is transitioning in some way across a 1.5 metre level change, then conceptually it would be a missing link. So, yeah. And sometimes you can't anticipate how things work.
Has this one got the film?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
No.
So there the water's going, you know, we can vary the speed of the water and everything, but yeah, it does, it sets up that anticipation, you know, the water is moving, let's follow it.
So continuing along the 1 in 21.
So this shows the water coming into the facade of the Lions building, and so we had it running through like on one of those stratas. So I wanted the water to come in to the building and run like on a ledge and then drop. And again, these iterations show that when the wall was on an angle and bent and much deeper, And so it shows how it changed, but still hung on to some of those ideas. So here it is quite large and showing this water falling into these pools. But again, we started looking at that and going, wow, we've got like a 60-ton piece of stone sitting there, you know, balancing on the edge of the dive structure. We'd have to join several pieces of stone. So we started doing things like saying, well, let's just make it out of one piece of stone and let's still hang on to the idea, but modify and make it fit more closely with the architecture. So here it started to work with this, it still retained this kind of scooping or this body. It's quite an unusual thing. It is like a sort of organ or something. And then started working with this faceting on the surface, again to acknowledge that sort of compression in the architectural language. And that was then followed through into other parts that you'll see.
Back to that one there. That's when I spoke about the Duperana quarry and the coffee being about 3 kilometres apart. This is actually the coffee quarry. You can see there's not as much colour in the face of that quarry on the left-hand side. So we produced a 28-tonne block out of that. That's about the maximum size we can transport to produce that 8-tonne carving, and it over about 6 months of hand carving. You're probably wondering what happens to the waste of the granite. Well, granite is crushed and used into other materials like concrete and road base and so on. So nothing gets wasted. So this is part of the hand carving process. It's just chip away, and yeah, 6 months later we produce something like this.
It's kind of an uncanny part of the whole form, because it almost suggests like you peel away the surface of the building and there's this rock embedded beyond. When the water comes down like this, it's also quite strong in that you get the sound. And one thing we've noticed is people seem to be interacting a lot with it, you know, because it's on that vertical level. In fact, we go past and people are putting their children in there. I'm not quite sure what sort of ritual that is to place a child in there, some sort of unspoken, yeah. But you know, it's meant to do that, obviously. It's quite a visceral piece. It's a bit like a sort of grotto, so it's a sort of strange puzzle in a way.
This was incredibly difficult to understand the water movement in terms of, because John was really eager to create a sort of swirling action with the water, but I don't know how you test that without building it in some way. We had little models and we did some tests in Maya that, you know, sort of drop little balls and then they sort of bounce across it. But, you know, I guess with Phil and just thinking, you know, we sort of learnt about, you know, after many conversations with Phil, you just sort of get into an understanding of that, you know, water moves in a logical way, and it's not always surprising where it's going to go because it's going to follow the low point. So, yeah, it was a challenge.
Also, in terms of form, it's a bit like, you know, when you get clay. So you all work with clay, I'm sure, plasticine, and you push your hand into it or your fingers, or you squeeze it, you know, it leaves this impression. So this form was a bit like a sort of an impression, you know, it was a footstep, if you like. And we used Boolean maths also to model some of the transition and flow of one form into another, along with the water.
So now we've come down one side of Yagan and we've crossed over the path at the Perth train station, where on one side is the amphitheatre and the other side is the Northeast Garden, which is a Western Australian botanic garden.
Yeah, this shows some of the different languages. Again, you know, we're in a dialogue which is now like stretching over a period of time, and we're working with models. We're also working with felt pens and sketches and trying to get the energy of those thoughts in there to try and retain it. So although it's starting to take form, we're still asking questions along the way and thinking, well, what do we do in this area? It's meant to be a contemplative area, wildflowers and a quiet corner. what would the water do over here?
We were quite eager to, the sketch on that side, I remember, it was just showing this idea that the water and the garden at this moment shouldn't be perceived as separate entities, and that they're of one landscape, obviously doing very different things and different materials, but that the experience is that they're one landscape.
In many ways, this is the piece where the landscaping, or the landscape form, and the water line form most dynamically interact. So we started, you know, again, continuing our discussions from technical to sort of poetic suggestion to try and sort of break through. So we sort of went back to this original thought of, you know, water pushing stone or water carving stone, and thought, well, we have evidence of it on a two-dimensional level. We have a negative form, we have the source, but what about where the water, if you like, pushes into a solid form? So this single solid form, and that was the one we handed around, that 3D print, the concept was the water races down and then hits into that stone form and is interrupted and flows around, and then bulges out, if you like, or seeps into and works with the landscaping. So it was really returning to that original thought. Let's convey those original thoughts of water carving stone.
I think we wanted this to provide a moment of, you know, for visitors that may be there for an event in the amphitheatre, that there is this cooling edge that maybe you could sit on and, you know, put your fingers in, and you know, Perth is a hot climate, so yeah. This is just showing how, you know, the intent was that it was quite immersed in that soft landscaping. And the wildflower garden is on either side of that water feature. So as you're walking through, there's water and flowers, and yeah, we wanted it to be as immersive as possible.
So here it is dry, and
it's not wildflower season yet.
So you can see how even without water, do you get a feeling of movement through there? Yeah, and people do respond to it. So you always see couples sitting there with their feet in the water, and you know, it's very, very shallow, but the way the water scoops around, and you know, it's clearly interrupted. So it's become quite a popular point, really, you know, and then spilling out into the plantings.
The edge is the contrasting edge is a DDA requirement, and then we also had to lift it through conversations that we were having, but in the end, I think it's a really good outcome that is what happened, because it does create this little seating edge or seating terrace at that garden bed level.
So this was one of the first stones we made into a rock, and it was quite an interesting process, because we started carving that, and it kind of represented what we had 3D modelled, but it just didn't have the feel as it does as you look at that. And one of the, you know, we talk about the collaborative approach, and one of the things that we really invested in, or really wanted to happen, was to make sure the stakeholders, John, Aspect, Lions and other stakeholders, were really involved with the process of producing these pieces. But this one in particular, this as being the first one, it just didn't quite look right to John, and so John and I had a look at this as it was being carved, and John just looked at the guys and said, "Stop, let's get them together." And one of the things John said, and I think it made a difference, well, I know it made a difference with everything that we did on this project, he explained to them what the intent was and how that scoop in that rock was a representation of water carving out of the face of that rock. And they kind of look at it, you know, these guys just are on their knees with their little hand grinders grinding away. They don't look at the overall picture, but when they understand what the intent is, they just got it, and they got everything after that, and everything flowed like they carved it like it was water. And I think it made a huge difference, John.
Absolutely. Here it is with water, and you can see it starting to transition. We started putting steps in. So see how there's this terracing, which is like topography used in model making as a strategy. So when we were building it, we made paper templates, yeah, to get it right. Full-scale paper templates, marked it out, and also did the same with the 3D forms to ensure. So I think there's some images that show that coming up. And then there's this contrast between the solid form and these terraced forms, and we start transitioning then from this terraced form into faceted forms, and you'll start to see where the water becomes the moment, so the water starts crossing over. So it moves backwards and forwards between that landscape and then that faceting language. Do you want to talk about this one, or shall I talk about this one?
So the faceting is introduced in the northeast garden, and then it sort of continues down into the gorge area, which the Xantheria and King Australis garden is shown here, and that's a whole other story. There's 58 of those installed in quite a small space, and they're quite impressive. Some of them over 3 metres with like 5 heads on top of them. So they really create this incredible sense of wonderment because they're so unique. Well, I feel that's what happens. So, you know, the water feature at this moment, the landscape is really changing. It's becoming much more dense. The buildings are sort of closing in at this point because the path is cutting in between. And so it's this part of it is staying quite thin. You know, the water's really got to it's got to travel through a thin stream to navigate its site.
So we called this the cascade, so it's like 58 metres and it's gravity-fed water from the top down to the bottom area. So I think these show some of the early modellings as well, and they'll show how it sort of changed and still hung on to some of the energy of the form and some of the original thoughts.
And I think, yeah, I think it's showing us working through how are we dealing with, you know, the levels in terms of access for visitors and the water, and are they doing different grades or are they together? So
so we wanted to move the water fast, so we went from that terraced landscape form into this faceting language where the water becomes more high energy, more active. And the great thing is, you know, there's always people walking down there because it's like a ledge next to the path. So you'll always get families and then the kids especially walking down there. And the water goes narrow and opens. This also shows some transitional points. How do we go from one language to another? Working with the stone, so we go from facet to terrace. And then the next image is... Many
hours spent on that transition. We had a 3D modeller who worked with us all the way through, and he was really remarkable at engaging with the process and being collaborative with John. And yeah, I do remember many conversations about this moment and how to do it in a way that made sense.
Because we're also, you know, conscious of translating this. It has to be documented. How do you document each individual stone to ensure that it can be built? And here is some modelling again where we were testing out how an individual stone might be carved and the sort of terracing you have and how that'll be affected. And then this shows some of the sections again of that terracing, so translating it into a documented form to ensure what you built will fit together as well. So it was all dry stone, you know, intended to be built as dry stone with a grout between.
So we documented every single unit in 3D plan and section,
So
and then, yeah, and then we tendered it, and then we re-documented it for you because you wanted different information. Yep. I guess that's one of the things that, you know, sometimes you can't quite anticipate what the supply is going to need and how much information they're going to need, and you know, it's a tricky balance.
Yeah, one of the things that wasn't documented was the larger sculptures and how what we needed to do to carve those. It's all well and good to have a little 3D model, but it's difficult for our carvers to get exact measurement. So one of the things that Aspect did for us was to segment or layer 3D model about every 100 millimetres, I think it was. So it's just like an MRI, so we had layers every 100 millimetres, so we made templates that would go over these sculptures as we carved them, and we just check so we basically carve 100 millimetres at a time, just by using these 3D layers. So that's the sort of thing we needed. As Marty said, every piece was documented, a little bit more detailed than that, generally 3D, and there were 1,049 different pieces put into this project.
Sheets, A0 sheets.
Yeah. So this is some of the carving, or at the factory, the carving process. These are just individual pieces. We marked up every individual piece. So when it came to site, we dry laid everything to make sure it fit before it went to site. And that's the end result. We've got the cascade running down into the pool, which John will talk about there. And it's, as I say, that's all Dupurana. The Dupurana capping coming off to the right-hand side as well.
So you can see the length there. So it's like, you know, walking up into the gorge, following the flow of the water, or it's flowing towards you if you're walking up. But started thinking, and the next lot of images show how we were looking at, well, okay, we've had the source, we've been on this journey. What happens to the water? Where does it go? You know, does it just sort of end? It doesn't sort of flow into anything. You know, we didn't want it to just go into this pool as a bit of an anticlimax. You know, what is the story? Where do we go with it? And one of the things I wanted to do was, I thought it'd be great to sort of flood the whole square, you know, down the bottom. But that didn't receive great support.
Maybe our renders weren't good enough.
Yeah, but we were still keen on that. But, you know, it would have been amazing, wouldn't it? Imagine a town square that floods, a bit like San Marco every now and then. Suddenly, you know, for no reason, it just fills with water and everyone's got to paddle and change the way they do things. But, you know, but it was also about, you know, thinking about estuary flows as well. Where does water go? It sort of spreads, and this deluge turns into basically being reabsorbed either into the land or into the ocean. And so we thought, well, it's got to spread, it's got to disperse, it's got to expand out into the site. So that was the gesture. And then also, logically, water needs to pool so it can be pumped back and cleaned and continue the whole cycle. So some of these graphics show testing and exploring, you know, how might we do that and what sort of area might it go. And then we returned back to some of those early kind of scrapings in the mud concepts and thought, well, rather than, you know, everything's flowing in this one direction, it needs to spread or fan out, a bit like the bird wings. So we, and I think we've retained this in the final piece. So these show how it might go. So we talked about collaboration and sort of feedback we'd get. So this is from Trevor Wally, one of the Whadjuk working group, Indigenous elder. So he wrote a story. You know, he saw all the things and wrote this beautiful story which related to the sort of things we've been showing you. Yeah? So this was in a way the kind of collaborative process. And then out of this came inspiration for, well, how do we deal with things like we're talking about now? How do we deal with this deluge and the water and it returns to something? How do we work with, you know, we want water coming out in the bottom, but does that make sense? So in this story, he talks about juggies or marron. I don't know what they're called in Brisbane. Juggies, marron, yeah, freshwater crayfish. Do you have them?
Moreton Bay bugs.
Moreton Bay bugs? I don't know. Fishing here. Yabbies, okay, so universal language, the yabby. You know, when you go to a pool and you see water rising or bubbles or things coming out of the ground, there's a swell, you know there's yabbies there, right? So Trevor was talking about that in that story. So that kind of gave us a pathway to think about how do we bring the other water out of the ground.
So the water is bubbling up from these moments of lift in the base of the water feature. So there's this sense of something sort of under there creating movement.
And although we didn't manage to flood the square, we still got that feeling of flood, or the energy of the water dispersing, and then created this ledge which people do sit around and really interact with.
So it's kind of like an infinity edge, so the water just flows down, and then when it gets to its high point it just flows off. So the other layer to the project, I guess, for us was the documentation process. The whole thing was completely modelled and documented out of Revit, with some elements of the water feature as 3D masses coming from Rhino, but then sitting in Revit for production of drawings. So there was a lot of between programs and learning curves of how best to do that. But given the scope and the level changes and IPH and lines, everyone in and Oricon all in Revit, we actually, I don't know how we would have done it if we weren't in there in the models with them, because we were running pipes for our water features or putting trees, and they were, you know, doing the same things, and so the clash detection was incredible. So that's just a screenshot showing the Rhino model on one side and the Revit on the other. It's the same model, but it's just sitting. It's the same model, it's just sitting in a different program, in a way. So this is an example of some of the documentation that we produced. So all of the units were individually numbered and categorised, and those numbers, you know, amazingly, you're on site 2 years later, and those numbers are sprayed on all of the units. So
it's just like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. Once we'd numbered it all, we'd dry laid it. We numbered every piece when it was dry laid, so we knew that it all fit, and then we moved it to site.
One of the things I was going to say about the source earlier, which I forgot to mention, is that then, you know, we really wanted it to feel like it had been carved out of that landform. So I was in the background having a whole lot of conversations with the contractors who were laying the paving, which were totally unrelated to the water features, and they were laid on pedestals because there's soil underneath, and they were just adamant that they couldn't line the joints up, and it was just a no-go zone. I was just like, you know, however much money is being spent on achieving this incredible water feature, and then, you know, I'm not going to be told that they're not going to line the joints up. And so, you know, had a bit of a conversation on site, and then, the 2 weeks later I came back and it was all done. So, yeah.
This is part of the dry laying, so we knew it could be done. Yep. So this is part of the quality inspections with John. Marty joined us on numerous occasions as well, and you know, there wasn't a lot wrong with what we did. There were minor things. You know, when pieces were modelled, we put them together, and some of the layers didn't quite line up, so it was just a matter of fettling those and working with those. This is the beauty of hand carving as opposed to CNC producing a product like this. 2 things. First of all, CNC processing is unforgiving. Once you CNC process, which is computer-aided design or computer-cut processing, you're not going to get that rock feel, you're not going to get that natural feel. This really does, and we know this, maybe because we're biased, we know the story behind it all, but I do believe that there were so many little changes that once you put a 300, 400 kilo block on a CNC robotic bed and then CNC cut it, that's it. There's no changing that. You can't put it back there later and try and get the XYZ axis exactly where it was and put that robot down again to fettle it or change it. So I think what we did was the right way to go. And we had those choices at the start, and I really think we did the right thing at the end of the day. We gave a lot of people employment, and we created something that was handmade, and I think there's something said to be that for that. This is Marty's feet, if you don't recognise them.
Keep going.
So this is on site, this is laid, this is dry. I was fortunate enough to go down to the site a week or so ago when we had torrential rain, and it's really one of the beautiful things about these water features is they all cascade into each other, and when you've got rain you can turn the water off and you've still got the water movement. You can see the water just cascading down these elements, and it really is a natural landscape.
I'm not sure if we've got any photos of people interacting, but they seem to be inhabiting every part of this area, the landscape especially. The other day I was there and there was people like washing their clothes here and drying them out on the rocks. It was like a village, you know. So, you know, that whole concept of the People's Square, you know, it's Perth, so people really took it on and just set up camp here, and we'll stay over there, and you know, it's great to see that kind of response, you know.
These two bubbles, this is what we're talking about, the Abbey bubbles coming up the surface in the pool at the end.
Just go back to the other one. Yeah, so there's also the artwork there in the text-based piece by Paul Carter. That's the one that's talking about the bellbuck story of walking and tracking and moving through the landscape. And that then leads into the market hall. So there's a kind of connection with, you know, art gestures, different artists, different architects, builders, different materials all the way through. And it's great to see that kind of conversation taking place, you know. So there you can see there's that sense of, you know, it's a pool, but there is a sign which says no swimming, I think. Yes. But technically they're not swimming, they're walking or wading or falling. It's not really deep enough to swim. So
these blocks were a metre by metre, up to 500 mil thick, so they weighed up to about 800 kilos, 900 kilos per piece.
There's a step in the slab for this, which was difficult to detail and work around, but then there's also a step up onto the dive structure, which has a big expansion joint. So, yeah, it's a technical tidbit.
Ah, there we are. There's Kirsten. Yeah, that's opening day. Kirsten couldn't be with us, but some photos, live shots. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you all for coming, and